Somebody told me a long time ago, the 3-2-1 rule, 3 copies of data, 2 different media types, and 1 offsite. That takes an FTE. That takes a team of people to make sure that that happens. And if you're AT&T, how much more so should you be doing it? If you're a small, medium-sized business, you should definitely be doing it. We've both seen, experienced, and have heard of companies from AT&T who gets ransomware and they pay and they move on and they back up their stuff. They're all great. To very small businesses who get ransomware for $3, $4, $5 million, $10 million and don't realize it. And you think, I'm a small company and I do X and no bad guy's ever going to come attack me, which is terribly wrong. Good day, everyone. Thank you for coming to the State of Security Podcast. I'm Jeff Hancock, your host. Today, we have a special returning guest, Rick Leib. Our topic today that we'll be going over will be ransomware and resilience, steps to take before, during, and after an attack. Rick, welcome to the program again.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate coming back.
Absolutely. Can you give us some of your background and history, particularly as it relates to cybersecurity, but then also, any ransomware resilience experience you have?
Ensuring that we honor, and I honor in specific NDAs, I won't use names of organizations or people. Where I need to use an organizational name or a person's name, I will in fact fake those names. So I did work for a couple of hospitals that did enjoy, or rather did not enjoy, a ransomware attack. So I was there, got us through a couple of different incidents. My experience, I've been doing this for 35 years. I hold a valid CISSP, CISO, certified HIPAA security expert. So all the good fun stuff. The alphabet soup is, too long after everybody's names in this business after you've been around for a couple of days.
Yep.
Yeah. So my background is, security, 35 years. I've been through a couple of different ransomware events, been through some malware events with other clients and going in and cleaning up after the mess and finding out all the issues, where the issues were at, how to avoid those moving forward, how to ensure that the client was no longer actually infested, because when you do a data restore, you might restore your malware. So you want to be sure of that. So yeah, I've got some experience in those areas.
Well, today I think our primary goal, with the state of the world being what it is, ransomware attacks became much more prevalent a couple of years ago when there's some high profile attacks and breaches, et cetera. I think a lot of folks, when they think about ransomware, they think bad guys hop into your network and trigger ransomware right away. But that's a little inaccurate, I think. I think from our experience, and I'm sure you'd agree, right? It's really the bad guys coming into your network for a while and being quiet and looking like everybody else, and then hunting around to seeing what data is most important to them, and then eventually locking it down. So you could have somebody in your network right now and not know it until it's too late. And when it's too late, you've got the proverbial option that everyone seems to have. Oh my gosh, who do I report to? Because I've got to let the government know or authorities know that I've been ransomware, and what should I do? And that triggers a whole lot of conversation. I think today, though, we really want to try to focus on what people do beforehand. When you're sitting back listening to this, if you're a CISO, a CEO, a CIO, how do you prepare for that? What do you get ready to do? How do you engage the key stakeholders, if you will? So let's start there. So how have you seen organizations, CISO, CIO, CEOs identify key stakeholders in the response planning piece of the stage?
In my experience, there's 2 lines of thought. There's the right way and the wrong way, in my opinion. The right way is to get a large group of individuals across your organization, because that gives you different perspectives into what can malware do? How can it come into my network? What is it going to damage? Where are my intellectual properties? If I just use the IT team only, they have no idea half the time where your AR records are, or what AP does, or when things are coming in, when checks are being cut other than their own paycheck, typically. So in my experience, the right way to do it is get a broad perspective into your diverse team of your stakeholders. Get your CEO involved, get your CFO involved, get the director of your warehouse, the guy out there making sure that the forklifts are out there operating on schedule, your logistics schedule, your trucking schedules are working. Make sure that you get this guy in there, because he's kind of important moving your product out the door if you're a manufacturer of any sort or a warehouse of any sort. You want to get your legal involved, in my opinion, because legal should be driving this from day one. prior to any event. So everything that I do as a security expert, I bounce off of our legal team, and I make sure that legal is involved, make sure that they approve, because whatever we do, they have to defend, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I try to get HR. Go ahead.
Especially with legal. It's very, when you're planning out a session, right? So the idea here is being able to look forward in your organization and say, how do I plan and prepare for this type of an event? And who are all the key people, parts, and players, both from a strategic executive level, but then even, I would say, to your point, like a mid-level as well. So what do people have to do? In some organizations, the CISO is not the senior level. The CISO is like the mid-level, and the CIO is runs the IT security show. And it's important, to your point, that that individual engage the board, engage the senior level executives, including the chief legal counsel and the CFO, but then also, across that plane and down, even to your point, right? So who else in the organization needs to understand? The CISO needs to know what's going on. The IT director may need to know what's going on if you've got one. And this is just, again, we're only talking preparation. We're not talking, oh my gosh, now I've got a problem. What do I do? This is just in preparation for, right? So it's a good point. So go ahead. You were mentioning HR.
So I always try to get HR support in there as well, because they're running your HRIS system. They're running your third-party systems. They know who's here, what's not here. Getting these different business units and getting their perspective is critical, in my opinion, because they know the business better than any one person or any one team, plain and simple, right? Get your risk management professionals in there, because your risk management professionals can actually point out different areas of risk and why you do this and why you accept this risk. So understanding those and understanding how to build your resilience ahead of time is critical, in my opinion.
Where would this initially sit with, right? What have you seen in organizations where the responsibility for ransomware response planning sits within an organization? Would you say that's at the board level? Have you seen it at the CISO level? Where have you seen it work effectively?
I've seen it work effectively on multiple levels. The CISO level, typically it works well as long as you're, and I'm going to qualify this, as long as your CISO is not a director or manager in your organization. It has to sit in executive, because without executive support, you've got nothing. I don't care what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to buy shelfware, buy a new left-handed widget. It doesn't matter. If you don't have executive approval, you don't have executive sponsorship and support, you don't have a plan. You have no way to truly move forward. So in my opinion, it should be at the CISO level, because that's your security expert, or your CRO, your chief risk officer, which could be your CISO. Those are the folks that actually have or should have the ear of the executive staff, like the CEO, CFO, because when things go wrong, the CEO and the board are ultimately responsible. Plain and simple. I'm a vice president in our corporation. When something goes wrong on my team, I am ultimately responsible. It's no different. But if I were to make decisions and not include you, my CEO, and then something went wrong, you would still be responsible. You'd tear me up, but you'd still be responsible, right? The same with the board, right? The board's ultimately responsible. So I try to keep it at that executive level. Always have executive buy-in. If you don't have executive buy-in, you have nothing.
How have you seen teams be prepared, organizations, executives be prepared or get prepared or properly trained, I guess would be a better way to put it, to respond quickly and efficiently to these types of threats?
The thing I recommend with any organization is muscle memory, right? So get through it and do your training. Get your tabletops in there. Don't tabletop just with IT. Get your CRO in there, get your CFO in there, get your CEO in there, get that director of the warehouse out there, because you're going to affect his ability or her ability to ship product, right? So get those folks in there and involve them. And I wouldn't do it once a year. I mean, once a year is your minimum that you have to do it. Anytime you have a change in your organization, do it again. Update your processes, update your documentation, do it again. Do it 3 times until everyone understands what their role is, how to perform that role, and where that role reports up to, because as soon as an incident hits, all of your reporting structure changes every single time. It's amazing how that works.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. It sounds like more recommendation of essentially tabletop exercises, getting everybody together once a month, once a quarter, saying for 90 minutes or 2 hours, we've got a problem, who's responsible, who's in charge, how's this work?
I recommend quarterly, typically, to my clients.
Yeah.
Or anytime you have a major change. If you have a minor change, update it at the quarterly mark. If you have a major change, update it, and then scrap your quarterly and start new quarterlies immediately.
Agreed. So from a communication strategy perspective, like let's go towards like during an attack. So internally, keeping teams aligned, making sure communications are working, who's on point, who's remediating, as you point out, who's remediating right now, who's helping keep the lights on. I think that's a really important point, because that speaks to 2 different teams that respond to this, a technical team and a business team. I would even add to that a legal team so they can know, what the legal options are. And then if it's a public issue, you're going to need a speaker. You're going to need somebody to go out there and state what's going on. Only one person, not 5 people, right? From a communications plan perspective. But I think internally, I think that's important. So, maybe pre-written plans, that kind of thing. But then also how to handle public relations and the media, like I said earlier, and customer communications, which sometimes gets put way back on the back burner with the strategy and the goal of trying to deal with the immediate problem. You still have to deal with the customer, let them know what's happening. And that I think is forgotten. But what have you seen best practices for internal communication?
For internal communication, typically assign one person that role, right? So that CISO or CIO, they are communicating. We need to stop every executive in the world going down to their favorite engineer and saying, hey, got a minute? That's not the time to say, got a minute? I want to talk to you. Where's my stuff? Where am I at in the right? So you shouldn't have that. Your internal communication plan should be handled and laid out so that the CEO knows where to get information. The CIO knows where to get information. All the C-levels know exactly where to get their information, and they need to stick to that. They need to go to that one person or 2 people and get their information and ask their questions. And if they don't have immediate response, don't go down to your engineering team because they're busy right now. They're really busy sweating all the bullets, all that good fun stuff. So the internal communication should be laid out ahead of time, including your external communication. So your social media, your social monitoring, your social media monitoring. What's going on out in X? Do I have a customer going, oh my Lord, this is broken? You need to understand that. So it's not just telling people, but pay attention to what's going on around you. Social media is huge these days. I'm not a big social media guy, but the reality is it's here. And people use Reddit constantly. They use X constantly, Facebook. So you want to make sure that you've got somebody with your communications, your internal communications running everything internally. Your external communications have access to external communications, find out what's going on, make sure they can speak to the public, and keep an eye on it so that they can reverse or stop negative press or incorrect information.
Yeah, employees speaking out. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, agreed. Had that happen a few times. So from an external communications, particularly with customers and partners, you recommend really one person out there having that conversation just to control the communications on that particular ransomware issue. So again, we're still looking at this from what do you do beforehand? So having that plan in place so we know, so organizations know at what point do we contact everybody? At what point do we go public with everybody, right? So some of the SEC rulings and other statewide cybersecurity policies, regulations really require companies, depending on the impact of the ransomware attack, if it touches customer data and it has to touch a certain number of customer data records, the companies are required to go public, usually within 7 days to 10 days, depending on what state you're in the US. And for everyone's edification here, there's 51 different breach notification laws in the country. That's literally one for every state, plus one for, I think it's DC, since they don't consider themselves a state. But yeah, so I think there's that people have to put into this mix when you're putting together ransomware preparedness or response, you're responding, right? Understanding what data sits where and when are you legally required to actually go public with information. So that having that single point of person of saying, hey, there's one person in the organization who has the authority to speak out. It may not be the CEO. It may be a marketing person. It may be the COO. We saw the CrowdStrike CEO come out about the CrowdStrike Microsoft breach a month ago. Some people criticized him pretty heavily for it. Other people said, hey, look, he's trying to get out in front of it. So I think there's always that you got to have a plan so that you're addressing those types of issues. I mean, communications, as we know, is pretty important, pretty critical in any breach. So in a preparedness perspective, a pre-breach situation, and you're getting ready, how do you do it? What do you do? Having a playbook for your executive team. Here's what you do, here's what you don't do is pretty important from a comms perspective, I think.
You also have to have a playbook for how do you manage the calls coming into your call center if you have one, right? So now a customer may be impacted. Your services may be impacting a customer, and now you got one customer, 5, 10, 20, 40 customers calling in. So you need to have that prepared as well so that your help desk or whoever your external facing support structure is, whatever that mechanism is, that they have something to say. The worst thing they can do is call in, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
That's probably the worst thing I've ever heard when I've called in on a breach. The other thing that you've got to keep in mind, and as you're planning these things out, right, and you're planning your communications out, is contracts. So, especially in the healthcare world, right? In the healthcare world, we have all sorts of contracts. We want to know as soon as possible. We want to know within 10 minutes of a breach in some cases. I've seen contracts 1 day. I've seen contracts 1 week. I've seen contracts literally try to get 3 hours. I don't know how you notify anybody within 3 hours. You still don't even know what happened in 3 hours. But you still have to take that into consideration so your external messaging is consistent, because you don't want to have multiple messages out there.
To summarize what you said, certainly having an internal plan, a strategy, who's on point to communicate, who's on point to follow up, the technical issues, the business side, so having a playbook essentially for that, and then everyone's particular roles. But then also externally, what's the playbook for engaging your third-party suppliers? So if you're breached, it could have been through one of their networks. It could affect them materially in another way. So you've got to have a plan to reach out not only to your vendors, but to your point, what's the statement to the customers? Right? How do we handle that? I think those are, and we're still like in the comms preparation perspective, right? So we haven't even gotten into any of the technical, making sure you don't screw things up perspective here. So
this is still the business phase. This is still planning for business. This is your business recovery or your business continuity planning. This is all part of that.
Yep. Agreed. I think that's a pretty critical piece. When you look at all the breach reports and you see the responses from companies, many of them try to sweep under the rug the technical issue and really try to focus on, oh my gosh, we're okay. We're dealing with everything's fine. I've seen only a few who come out and say, hey, look, yeah, congratulations. We're patting ourselves on the back. We're now in this club. And here's how we're dealing with it, right? There's technical things we're going into. We're not going to be public about that, but it's underway. Business-wise, here's how it's going to affect you. Here's our workarounds. Here's how we're going to be successful here. Usually it's, we're considering paying the $56 million ransomware demand from the attackers. We're working with the FBI or DHS to get recommendations on what to do and how to pay, right? That's really probably not the best thing you want to communicate publicly.
Correct. Because the minute you communicate that publicly, you're now going to have 10 more bad actors lined up at your firewall, plain and simple, or lined up in your mailbox.
So should executives pay?
That's a hard one to answer. And I'm going to be honest, as bad as this is going to sound, depending on your business, if you're one of the 16 core critical infrastructures, right, and you're really impacting a lot of lives, especially in healthcare where people could be dying. Now, I've heard too many times there's never been a person die from a ransomware attack, and that is absolutely incorrect. There's one case where somebody was actually on a operating table and the OR PC got encrypted right in the middle of an operation. And it was a long operation, and somebody did actually die a couple of days later. That patient, they tried to save him, wrap it up, and they couldn't save him. There's just an issue there. And I don't want to go into any details on that because I have intimate knowledge in that area and I can't talk about it. But it has happened, right? So should you pay? That really is a decision that you should make ahead of time with your board of directors, because I have worked with boards that say, you know what, we're going to pay because we know we can't go 5 months without our systems. We know we can't go 3 weeks. We don't trust our IT department. We're going to pay. All right. Do you have that money set aside in an escrow account somewhere? Do you have that? Because if you have it internally, you may get that encrypted. You may not have access to your system. You're going to have to go physically get out of the bank, and then ordering $5 million at the bank, even if you're a business, is a very difficult process and takes a long time to gather that kind of money. So you have to think ahead of time. I don't like paying because if you pay, they're going to come back. Plain and simple. You're talking about thieves, right? There might be honor among thieves, but there's no honor between a thief and a victim. There's no honor there whatsoever. So I've worked with them where they want to pay because they just don't trust their IT department, which is a different problem we could talk about on a different podcast, because I can talk for about an hour and a half on that particular issue. And then I've seen other companies just say, you know what, I'm not going to pay because if I pay, they're going to come after me again. And then they're absolutely correct. They're going to come after you again, or their buddies are going to come after you next. It's going to happen. So again, I fall on both sides of the fence on this one. Ethically, no, I don't think you should ever pay. That's my ethical stance. As a member of InfraGuard, Homeland Security Information Network, my official stance is no, never pay, because that's the law. However, I've seen instances where people want to pay just to get over it. And then the question is, when you pay, are they really going to give me the key? That's question number one. Number two is, oh my God, did they exfiltrate data? And you're still in that planning stage. So you don't know if they've actually exfiltrated data or not, right? These are things you have to think about ahead of time. So if you're going to pay, think about it ahead of time. How are you going to do it? What's the qualification we're going to pay versus not pay? I fall on both sides of that. Sorry, Jeff.
No, it's good. It's good. I think that's a good point though, because I think that you brought up a couple things, right? Being able to typically, first off, people when they have a ransomware attack and they're alerted, they usually pick up the phone and call DHS or FBI. There's a liability issue there for a lot of people. A lot of companies are, if I just let the government know right away, then there's some liability coverage I can take, and it's true to a point, but that still doesn't absolve you of anything. But to your comment earlier, so and I want to make sure people will understand this. So if I'm a bad guy and I break into your network, again, I'm not going to lock it down right away. I'm going to go find out what's available and know what to lock down and when to lock it down. But even before in the process of figuring that out, I may be exfilling your data already. So I'll be stealing your information and holding it over here and then lock your system down and say, hey, you're not going to have access until, and I'll give you access. I mean, people aren't asking that conversations. Victims aren't saying, do you have a copy of my information? Can I get that too? Bad guys aren't going to give that up. They're going to go sell that information as well. So not only do you pay for the ransomware demand, but then you also pay again because they're going to take your data and monetize it or damage your customer's information or make them more vulnerable. There's a couple of different things that go on. So I think to your main point here, which is a really good one, when you start to say plan on what to pay for, when to pay for. So in the planning process, that question has to come up. You have to ask yourself as the board, as the CFO, as the CEO, what are we going to do? Do we agree to pay, or what's it look like? If it's over this amount, okay, we'll pay. If it's this system and that system, do we pay? This is all after the fact, right? This is all after the damage has been done. We haven't even talked about really the proactive pieces. So I think you make some really good points there that people need to understand and call out.
My opinion is at least have the conversation with your board of directors, your CFO, or your private ownership. At least have the conversation. Ethically, I don't believe in paying, but I have seen times where paying actually made sense in some cases.
Yeah. So switching gears here for a little bit. So data backup protocols and recovery. So from, a proactive position, what have you seen are the elements of an effective backup strategy, let's say, or a way to ensure minimal impact from ransomware?
That's a good question because I've seen a lot of different things work and they should work, but they didn't work, et cetera. One of the things that I try to recommend to my clients is do not do real-time backups. Don't do it. And the reason being, if you have a real-time backup, because that data is so critical, and if it gets encrypted, you just backed up all the encrypted data. And you better hope your versioning works. You can go back a couple of steps and make sure that backup's good. Usually that type of backup is done to a cloud, off to some cloud somewhere, and you better pray that their versioning works, which means there's a lot of testing involved before you adopt that plan. Typically, I recommend having nearline backups, right? So do your backups, your 3-2-1 backups, and then have your latest backup, your latest full backup, and your latest set of transactional backups. Have them nearline. Don't have them online, because if you have them online, the attacker might be able to get to your backups and encrypt your backups. Because as an attacker, that's one of the first places I want to go. I'm going to live off the land, use my common Windows, Linux, commands, so the admins don't see me through the SIM, through their monitoring system, potentially. I just want to find out where your backups are. I don't want to touch them yet, but I want to know who's got access and what permission levels do I need and where is it. If it's online, you're already in trouble. If it's nearline, where you have to physically take it from one place to another place, or some physical barrier, whether it be a logical barrier or physical barrier, but have that barrier there so that they're not directly accessible. That's where I try to tell people to get to. And that's not simple to get to. It really isn't. It takes time. It takes knowledge. It takes practice.
So like offsite storage, backup storage, offline storage, which is kind of what you're talking about now. But there's also cloud-based, right? So people can back up stuff in the cloud. It's quick, easy, simple. But then the cloud provider you're using is a third party. So who controls that security to make sure that
exactly
it's safe? So that's also another part in your checklist from a preparation perspective you've got to look at. Yeah, agreed. I know somebody told me a long time ago, the 3-2-1 rule, 3 copies of data, 2 different media types, and 1 offsite.
Never hurts. It works.
Well, it does. And that takes an FTE. That takes a team of people to make sure that happens. And if you're AT&T, how much more so should you be doing it? If you're a small, medium-sized business, you should definitely be doing it. But we've both seen, experienced, and have heard of companies from AT&T who gets ransomware and they pay and they move on and they back up their stuff. They're all great. To very small businesses who get ransomware for $3 or $4, $5 million, $10 million and don't realize it. And you think, I'm a small company and I do X, and no bad guy's ever going to come attack me, which is
I hear that all the time.
Terribly wrong. I know. It's sad to think about. Everybody needs to have that plan, right? So it's unfortunate that people think, oh, I'm not that important. But to a bad guy, you're a testing ground, right? If he can go prove his skills in your organization, he'll go try and ransomware DHS right next. So,
or you're the latest node, and they can use you to attack. Absolutely. Yeah. So the backup 3-2-1, I recommend them if you can get to that point. Some companies can, some can't. In my opinion, they should all be able to get there if you have data that's important. I mean, I've seen veterinary clinics have a solid, beautiful business plan with a great BCP and a good backup system, and you're like, can you teach all of your neighbors how to do that?
It's very strange. It's very strange to see. And I think the key point here is that there's a lot of good information out there on how to do it. People just need to avail themselves and make it practical for them. Not just, you don't need to follow AT&T's guidelines or Walmart's guidelines. You need to find something that works. But to that point, from a ransomware readiness, resilience perspective, in the industry typically known as cyber resilience, which gives you the ability to protect yourself against a variety of things, but it's really anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt. And those are four foundational elements that, from a cyber resilience perspective, that were made very popular 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, has a document, cyber resilience document, where they go through, anticipate, withstand, adapt, and recover, and what that means to organizations. So that's really important for people to look up. It's a key set of processes and methodologies that not all will work for your organization, but it gets your head in the right perspective. The anticipate piece I like the most, because that makes companies sit back and say, how do I get ready for an attack? How do I know what's most important to a bad guy? And how do I protect that? And a lot of people don't think that proactively because they're busy running a business, clearly.
Right.
But it's really important.
Or they don't do a business impact analysis. They just assume they know where everything's going to be. They know where all the problems are going to exist. They assume they know what's important. They don't realize there's 42, there's 42 service accounts keeping this running, and they all have a different user ID, different passwords, and they're spread across different systems. And they don't think to that level because that's not what they do. That's what you and I do, So they need to talk to people like us who have that knowledge to help them get to that part. And that's all goes part of your planning. They should have an absolute third party come in. In my opinion, third parties are awesome for this because they're non-biased, right? They're completely unbiased. So get a third party to come in and actually help you put that together, or review what you've done and then make recommendations.
Yeah. Agreed. Because it's difficult to get out of your own head when you've got, you're running your own business, and how do I know what's valuable, what's not valuable? How do I prepare myself? So I think there's a lot of good sense in doing that, right? Getting in that outside input for sure. We talked about how often they should back up their systems and recovery processes. Let's see, what else we were talking about here? The risks of relying solely on cloud-based backups. That's always a particular conversation, right? Should they do that?
No. And nobody wants to hear no because it's costly, right? It costs a lot of money. It costs technology, costs time. It costs bandwidth. Because clouds make their money off storage, processing, and bandwidth, plain and simple. That's where their three key areas are at for making money. So if you're going to store a data, if you're going to back up data, now you've got bandwidth costs immediately. Then you've got the processing cost to process that data. Then you get the storage cost to store that data. Now, if you replicate that data to a different cloud, which I recommend, now you're going to take that data, you're going to pay another bandwidth fee for that. And then as another cloud provider, you're going to pay a bandwidth and another processing and another storage fee. So it's expensive. And I realize that. And I try to make sure people think about that. So having one cloud vendor is an awesome idea in theory, because now you've got one hand to shake and one throat to choke, right? The problem is when you get vendor lock-in, right? Now you're going to start getting, you can't control their security. You don't know that they're secure. You can ask them for their SOC 2. You can ask them for their ISO 27001, which are good places to start. These are great.
Yep.
However, they're no guarantee, right? They're just not a guarantee. I mean, I won't guarantee any client that they're not going to be breached. I won't, because I can't do that because their supply chain can be breached, completely out of our hands. The same thing with a cloud provider, right? Their supply chain can be breached. Something happened in their contractors or their guards, bring in a USB stick and accidentally stick it in something because they thought it was going to have their music on it for the day, and all of a sudden your air conditioners are acting kind of funny.
Agreed. So that's a key point. So I think cloud-based backups are good, and people go to those because they're quick and convenient and cheap-ish, but the risk is still there. I think having an organization be able to control and manage their actual physical backup, I think that should be first and foremost. Then you go to a cloud backup, just in case. Doesn't cost you. It could cost you more from a hardware perspective, and certainly will from a time perspective. But having this preparation keeps you from paying $5, $6 million, $10 million, $100 million. And I think that's much more worth it, right? From a cost perspective, for sure.
Most clients are going through this process. They should know their RTOs and RPOs, right? So as part of this process is understanding that how long can I be without my data or without my processing until where can I no longer do business? Where am my finance going to be? Okay, I got to stop at this point because this is my last end. I can't go any further than the RPO. My RTO, plan to recover, and your recovery process objectives. Now you got to stop and start restoring, right? You need to understand that as part of your malware strategy. So if you just feel like you can just back your data up and then at any point in time, throw your hands up in the air and say, I give up, I'm just going to restore my data, that's not going to work real well. You're really going to have a negative impact on the organization and your cyber resiliency. You just failed.
Let's see some other questions we've got here. Being able to conduct a post-breach analysis is similar to the BIA you talked about, business impact analysis. Looking at tying those things together, and I think that's a key part of planning. Looking at business impact analysis before you get breached, before you have to deal with this. What do you plan for? And then from a post-attack review, what are you going to look for as success and as failure? Because in every one of these instances, what are you going to do right and what are you going to do wrong? And that's going to clearly determine, your success to some degree. So being able to have that post-breach analysis line up with your business impact analysis, I think is very key in that process.
It is key because that's where you're going to learn. That's where you're going to learn where the failures were, where the mistakes were made. You're going to learn how to improve at that point. You're going to learn how to prevent this from ever happening again, potentially. You're also going to find the accountabilities. Was it my company? Was it a supply chain company? You're going to find all these things. You're going to find now you got compliance issues to deal with too, right? You're going to learn about any compliance issues that you run across. Or we planned right, we didn't hit any compliance issues. Wow, made it by an hour and a half. Something along those lines, right? It's going to improve your detection capabilities, your response time. All of these things are going to get better next time something happens, including containment, which is important to learn.
Agreed. So, final thoughts from you. Like, what would be your recommendations and your ideas about how people can prepare for and adapt through a breach, a ransomware attack?
So there's only one answer to this question. There really is only one answer, and that's planning, plain and simple. You have to plan this out. You have to plan for failure. Every business out there I know plans for their product to fail, right? There's going to be a better widget coming out somewhere. So they're already thinking, and that mindset's already there in the organization with with the C-levels and the board, that's already there. Capitalize on that and say, guys, we need to think about our cyber resiliency. So when we do get breached, and I'm going to use the word when intentionally, and I always use that word when intentionally. So when we do get breached, whether it be a phishing attack, whatever, it doesn't matter. But when we do get breached, how do we keep the business running? How do we keep our cyber resiliency fully operational, right? How do we keep that? So now we need to plan about splitting our staff, and 2/3 are working on this, 1/3 working on that, and maybe a different department. The whole team is working on something. But these plans need to be made ahead of time so that as you're going through it, yes, you're trying to resolve it, you're trying to find it, you're trying to recover. But at the same time, your cyber resiliency was thought out ahead of time. You have X number of resources, whether it be staff, it be cloud, doesn't matter. You've got those in place. You've got those backup systems in place. So you're still making money. You're still trying to, you're still being able to serve your customers. Even if it's at a slower capacity, you still have that capability. And that needs to be thought through by every organization.
I agree. That's a great point, Rick. That's a great point. Well, I appreciate your time. I think we've kind of exhausted our allotted time here, keeping it really to the point and answering a lot of good questions. So appreciate your contribution here and your direction and guidance. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening for State of Security podcast. Next time, as this podcast is released, it's October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Next time, I believe we've got another Cybersecurity Awareness Month focused podcast, topic to be determined, but stay tuned for that. Appreciate everyone's time. Have a good day.